Do you want to witness one of the most explosive showdowns ever? Picture Talia Moore, a near-mythical Delta Force operative, locked in a life-or-death struggle against Beck Montoya amid blazing flames and collapsing steel beams. Their final clash sends shockwaves through the entire criminal underworld, and that's just a glimpse of the heart-stopping action. In this extended story, you'll uncover the secrets behind Talia's lethal skills, the harrowing fate of innocent captives, and the true reach of a sinister syndicate lurking in the shadows. Ready to plunge into the twists and turns of this epic tale? Make sure to listen through to the very end. You don't want to miss how it all concludes. And if you enjoy gripping stories packed with danger and heroism, remember to subscribe to our channel for more pulse-pounding adventures. Your support fuels our passion for storytelling and helps us bring you even more incredible sagas. Talia Moore sat on the curb in the grimy heart of Eastfall, a sprawling city known for its ceaseless rains and the cold indifference of its inhabitants. In the half-light of a flickering street lamp, she looked like just another drifter on the streets, shoulders slumped, clothing worn to threads, and eyes obscured by the tangle of her hood. Passers-by glanced at her, then turned away with the same hurried apathy they showed to anyone else forced to sleep in doorways. The city streets were slick from a recent downpour, reflecting the neon signs of a late-night diner across the road, its bright pink and green lettering flickering ominously in the puddles. Cars hissed by, kicking up sprays of water and trash, but Talia barely moved when stray droplets soaked her ragged coat. She didn't care about the stench of stale rain or the worn soles of her battered boots. The city's disregard for people like her made it the perfect hiding place, a cloak that let her move unseen in the urban sprawl. Yet underneath that battered exterior lay something no stranger would guess. Talia Moore had once been the most lethal operative in an elite Delta Force unit. Her posture, though seemingly weary, revealed a coiled tension if one knew what to look for. She positioned herself at the perfect vantage to observe everything within a block's radius, adjusting only slightly to keep an eye on pedestrians and vehicles. Each subtle movement was deliberate, honed through years of training in environments far more treacherous than any back alley in Eastfall. Once upon a time, Talia had worn a uniform with pride, leading covert missions in hostile territories. Records of her deeds had, however, been erased in a series of clandestine cover-ups so thorough that even her name appeared on no official rosters. She was a phantom the government no longer acknowledged, a ghost who wandered the back alleys of an uncaring metropolis. That night, the damp cold seeped into her bones, aggravating old injuries that never fully healed. She could recall a painful mission in the jungles of an unnamed country, the humidity there so thick it felt like drowning with each breath. Memories of dusty roads in war-torn regions flickered through her mind, desert heat scorching her face as she navigated landmines and ambushes. Hardly anyone suspected that a woman dozing by a diner in a tattered coat had once outsmarted, outrun, and outgunned entire squads of insurgents. She had left behind that life, or perhaps that life had left her behind. Either way, she was consigned to the shadows because her continued survival depended on secrecy. Tonight, she was not simply loafing around in the drizzle. A faint tremor in her jaw and the sharp vigilance behind her half-closed lids suggested she was waiting for something, or perhaps for someone. It wasn't random that she chose this particular corner, near a rundown diner that stayed open all night. Under the soft buzz of neon signage, drug dealers occasionally approached unwary patrons. Lone officers sometimes harassed the homeless, and desperate souls sought quick respite in a cup of stale coffee. Talia liked vantage points where the flow of human traffic was predictable, yet overlooked by the city's indifferent throng. The perfect camouflage. But not everyone would walk by without noticing her. Sooner or later, someone was bound to disrupt this fragile peace. Perhaps an overzealous patrol or a curious local hoping to rid the neighborhood of what they saw as street trash. Talia had been stalked by minor threats before. Petty thieves, small-time criminals convinced she was an easy target. She usually let them walk away with a warning or a quick lesson in humility. However, on this particular night, things would unfold in a way even she couldn't fully anticipate. Eastfall's gloom would soon transform into the spark of a far-reaching chain of events. Events that would bring Talia's formidable skills out of the darkness in which she had concealed them for so long. The night deepened, and the rain turned into a steady drizzle that gleamed under the neon lights. Water pooled in potholes, rippling with each passing car. Talia kept her hood pulled low, tapping her fingers lightly against the curb in a rhythm that mirrored her heartbeat. She heard distant sirens, a normal sound in this part of the city, yet something in the cadence tonight felt off. It was as though the city itself was giving her a warning she couldn't fully decipher. She sat motionless, scanning the reflective surfaces of storefronts across the street and the black window of a vacant laundromat. In those glimmers, she caught sight of a police cruiser rolling down the road with deliberate slowness. A moment later, the vehicle pulled to a stop not far from the diner, and four uniformed figures emerged. She recognized their body language instantly. They weren't responding to a call with urgency or dealing with an immediate threat. Instead, there was an air of casual superiority about them, underpinned by the sort of reckless confidence that certain officers wore like a second skin. The leader of the group was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a rigid stance and a perpetual scowl. Sergeant Stephen Ards. His name was emblazoned on his badge and also etched into Talia's memory. Rumor around the streets labeled him as someone who enjoyed throwing his weight around when the cameras were off. Talia had seen the type many times. The overbearing posture, the restless grip on his baton. He was practically screaming for a confrontation. His three subordinates fanned out behind him. One was wiry and fidgety, perhaps new on the force but too eager to prove himself. Another, a woman with her hair tightly pulled back, maintained a closed-off expression that gave little away. The last was a stocky man whose eyes flickered with a sort of cruel humor, like he secretly relished the idea of scaring vulnerable people. They congregated in front of Talia, forming a loose semicircle. "Well, look here," Sergeant Ards announced, voice raised to be heard over the rain. "Another lost cause on our sidewalks. Shouldn't you be in a shelter somewhere?" His words dripped contempt, but Talia caught the slight grin tugging at the corner of his lips. A grin that told her this was not genuine concern, but a prelude to humiliation. Talia said nothing, watching him with an impassive gaze. She sized him up. Police belt weighed down by a service pistol, baton, flashlight, and cuffs. She imagined how swiftly she could strip him of those tools if push came to shove. Her Delta Force instincts told her it would take less than 5 seconds to incapacitate him. Yet she remained perfectly still, hoping to avoid the trouble that Ards was so clearly inviting. One of his subordinates, the wiry officer, snickered. "Hey, Sarge, notice her jacket? It's got a patch that looks military." He leaned closer, squinting at the worn fabric. "Think she's legit or one of those fakes who scrounge for sympathy bucks?" Ards took a step nearer, hooking his thumbs into his belt loops. "Yeah, you got dog tags, soldier." His tone dripped with condescension. He expected Talia to either cower or lash out. Sometimes brutes like Ards needed only the slightest provocation to pounce. Talia remained silent, her pulse steady. She recognized that any sudden movement might escalate the situation. She also knew that while she could defend herself handily, the resulting chaos would draw too much attention. Her anonymity was her shield, and she had no wish to blow it for a petty showdown with a few small-time bullies. Still, the tension in her muscles coiled. She would respond if forced. Ards noticed her calm indifference and seemed insulted by it. He sneered, tapping his baton against his palm. Perhaps in his mind, he was dealing with another helpless vagrant who could be shoved around for entertainment. When she remained unresponsive, Ards' frustration grew. "Let's see some ID," he barked, stepping close enough for Talia to smell stale coffee on his breath. "Or are you one of those lying panhandlers?" She met his gaze, her own eyes revealing a flicker of something unreadable. Something that should have warned him off. But Ards was too caught up in his own bravado. As the drizzle intensified and pooled around their feet, Talia braced herself for the oncoming storm, not of weather, but of conflict. She'd been around bullies like him before, and they always mistook silence for weakness. Tonight, that miscalculation would spin the night into directions none of them could guess. Lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder rolled faintly across the sky, underscoring the rising tension. Talia tried a final measure of restraint. She opened her mouth, hoping a few well-chosen words might diffuse the situation. "I don't carry ID," she said evenly, choosing each syllable with deliberate calm. "I'm no threat to you." Her voice only seemed to spur Ards on. No ID, huh? Vagrancy is a chargeable offense around here. Looks like we got ourselves a real heroine, guys. His baton tapped rhythmically against his palm, a silent threat. The wiry officer, taking his cue from Ards, snickered again and circled behind Talia, as if they intended to box her in. An uneasy shuffle ran through the female officer's stance. Talia noted it in her peripheral vision. Perhaps not all of them relished this. Sometimes group psychology took over, and a single dissenting voice was drowned out by the others. But no one spoke up to de-escalate. The group smelled blood, or at least the opportunity to make their night more entertaining at Talia's expense. Ard stepped closer, waving his baton near her face. Get up. Now, put your hands where I can see them. Let's see just how tough you are when you're standing, and we're all looking you in the eye. Talia slowly rose, not wanting to appear confrontational, but also unwilling to let herself be cornered. She was dwarfed by Ards's bulky figure, yet there was a fluid assurance in her stance. A lesser observer might think she was nervous or shaky, but in reality she was centering her balance, adjusting her posture for optimal defense. Her breathing slowed, her gaze flicked to each officer in turn, tracking their positions. I don't want trouble, she said, voice low and steady, but Ards was already reaching for her, determined to enforce his will. He grabbed the sleeve of her coat with a meaty hand, yanking her forward. The moment he did, Talia's survival reflexes kicked in. The next few seconds happened so quickly, the other officers barely registered the movement. Talia twisted her arm free in a practiced maneuver, pivoting on the ball of her foot to clamp her hand around Ards's wrist. Leveraging momentum, she torqued his arm behind his back, forcing him to drop to one knee with a startled yelp. The baton clattered onto the wet asphalt. Ards grimaced, a flicker of shock replacing his arrogant smirk. The other three officers jolted into motion. The wiry man scrambled for his sidearm, the stocky one yelled an expletive, and the female officer took a step back, her eyes wide. For an instant, Talia had Ards under control, her grip precise enough that a single additional movement could break his elbow. But she released him almost as quickly as she had subdued him. Her intention was not to maim, it was to signal that she was no easy victim. She stepped back to create distance. Rain dripped from her hood, trailing down the sharp angles of her jaw. The stocky officer fumbled with his holster, and the wiry one finally freed his weapon, pointing it with unsteady hands. Thunder rolled again, louder this time. The atmosphere was electric. Ards got up slowly, massaging his wrenched arm with visible anger. His eyes blazed with humiliation. A mere second or two had upended the entire power dynamic, and he couldn't let it stand. You're gonna regret that, he snarled, retrieving his baton from the ground. Before Talia could brace herself, he lashed out, adrenaline fueling his swing. The baton slammed into the side of her head, stunning her and sending flashes of white pain across her vision. She fell hard, knees hitting the drenched pavement. Blood pounded in her ears and a sickening dizziness took hold. Dimly, she heard shouts from the other officers, but their words blurred into white noise as darkness crept into her peripheral vision. When Talia came to, the hum of fluorescent lights replaced the roar of rain. She was seated in a dim interrogation room that reeked of stale coffee and the faint odor of sweat. Her wrists were encased in heavy metal handcuffs, tethered to a loop on the metal table. Across from her sat Sergeant Ards, sporting a bruise on his cheek from where she had twisted him to the ground. He stared at her with a combination of anger and something else. Uncertainty, perhaps. He didn't understand how a scrawny, seemingly homeless woman had managed to outmaneuver him in front of his team. For a bully like Ards, that was personal humiliation. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, slapping a folder onto the table with theatrical force. Talia glanced at the folder, which looked mostly empty, a few sheets of paper inside. Likely they had tried to run her fingerprints, only to come up blank. She said nothing, content to let silence be her shield. Ards's jaw tightened. He had expected fear, groveling, or at least defiance. Instead, he was confronted by Talia's unsettling calm. With a low growl, he threw open the folder. "Your prints don't match anything in our system. No ID, no record with any shelter in town. You're a ghost. That means you must be lying about whatever your background is. We're prepared to charge you with assault on an officer. That's serious time, lady." Talia's head still throbbed from the blow, and she could feel dried blood matted in her hair near the temple, poorly cleaned by whoever had given her a cursory bandage. Yet she kept her expression impassive, forcing her senses to remain alert. She had lived through far worse interrogations. A small-town precinct was child's play compared to black site facility debriefings or field arrests in hostile countries. "You're making a mistake," she said at last, her voice hoarse. She wasn't sure if she meant it as a warning to him or a statement of fact. Ard's eyes narrowed. Before he could reply, a soft knock interrupted them. Another officer, a young man with sweaty palms and a nervous twitch, stuck his head in. "Sarge, phone for you. Some official from the Department of Defense is on the line. They're insistent." Confusion flickered across Ard's face, quickly turning to anger. "Department of Defense? That's not possible. You sure it's not a prank?" The young officer just shrugged helplessly, adding that the voice on the phone sounded extremely authoritative. With a menacing grunt, Ard stomped out of the room, leaving Talia alone with her thoughts. Minutes later, she heard shouting in the hallway. Ard's voice escalated, responding to a calmer but firmer tone from whoever was on the phone. Though she couldn't make out every word, phrases like, "She can't just walk," and "Who does she work for?" cut through the muffled barrier. After a few more heated exchanges, Ard stormed back into the room, face flushed. His pride was clearly wounded even more deeply now. "Release her," he barked to the officer standing guard. "No charges, no record of this. Nothing. That's an order." A hush fell over the room as the officer hastily unlocked Talia's cuffs, letting them drop onto the table. Ard's leaned in close, his voice low with venom. "Your friends in high places might have saved you tonight, but I'll find out who you really are. Next time you won't get off so easy." Talia didn't bother responding. She simply rose from the chair, rubbing at the red marks on her wrists. Without a backward glance, she walked out of the interrogation room, leaving Ard simmering behind her. Outside, the drizzle had lightened to a mist. She stepped onto the wet pavement, her head still throbbing. The city lights felt harsher, and the swirl of residual adrenaline made her shaky. Normally, Talia would have vanished into the night like a wraith, seeking a new hiding spot. But the moment she stepped off the station's threshold, she sensed someone watching her from the edge of the lampost's glow. A tall figure in a dark, tailored suit emerged from the shadow cast by the flickering streetlight. He raised his hands in a gesture of non-aggression, revealing a neatly pressed shirt cuff peeking out from under his jacket. Talia froze, tension gripping her anew. She was in no mood for yet another confrontation, especially with someone who might be more than just a nosy passerby. "Miss Moore," he said calmly, voice subdued yet carrying a certain confidence. "My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm with the FBI." He moved slowly, pulling a leather badge holder from his inner pocket so she could see the glint of the federal seal under the street lamp. "I was inside the precinct on an unrelated matter. Heard a commotion about an unidentified woman with unusual combat skills. I had a hunch it might be someone special." Talia regarded him through narrowed eyes. She had no reason to trust any law enforcement figure, let alone a federal agent. Her experiences taught her that power structures often turned a blind eye to corruption. For all she knew, Caldwell might be just another cog in a broken system. "You have the wrong person," she muttered, turning to walk away. She had no interest in revealing anything more than she already had. He didn't try to grab her, which was a point in his favor. "I know about Lionel Greer," Caldwell said, his voice carrying enough volume to catch her attention. Talia stopped in her tracks, shoulders stiffening. Lionel Greer was a name that circulated in the underworld, a rumored arms dealer and trafficker whose reach extended well beyond Eastfall. She'd heard the rumor that he sold weapons to rogue paramilitary groups and was also knee-deep in human trafficking. Once upon a time, Talia had caught wind of him through her old channels. That Caldwell even knew Greer's name suggested he might have real intel. She turned slightly, half-facing him, ready to slip into the shadows if needed. "What do you want from me?" she asked tersely. Caldwell stepped a little closer, keeping his posture unthreatening. "I'm building a case against Greer. We believe he's not just trading arms, but also overseeing a vast human trafficking operation along the harbor. Each time we try to pin him down, he disappears behind layers of shell companies and corrupt officials. We need someone who can operate outside the usual channels, a specialist who can move in the shadows. His eyes flicked to the bandage on Talia's head. From the looks of what happened tonight, you might be exactly that type of person. She noted how he spoke, free of condescension or arrogance. His approach was measured, as if he anticipated her skepticism. "And you think I'm going to help you because?" she asked, trailing off. Her voice held a challenge. She had severed ties with officialdom a long time ago. Caldwell let out a slow breath. "Look, I know how messed up the system is. I know that the police letting you go so easily means someone very high up owes you or is protecting you. But I also know how dangerous Greer is. If you've got personal reasons to see him taken down, I can offer resources, intel, some measure of cover. But we'll keep it off the books. That's the only way to avoid half the city's corrupt power brokers tipping him off." Talia scanned the empty street, recalling how the Department of Defense had intervened on her behalf. She didn't know who had pulled strings for her this time. Maybe some old ally or a favor called in by one of her few remaining contacts. But Caldwell's approach seemed different than the usual bureaucrat. An uneasy truce formed in her mind. Lionel Greer was indeed a plague on the city, and though Talia's motivations were her own, she recognized that having an FBI agent with at least some genuine desire to stop Greer might be beneficial. "All right," she said at last, voice still guarded. "I'm not promising you anything, but if you dig up a way to corner Greer, I want to know." Caldwell nodded, as if he'd half expected her reluctance. "There's something brewing at the harbor. He's scheduling shipments of certain products. I'm going to keep digging. If you find anything on your end, I want us to share intel. We won't get many shots at Greer." Talia stared at him for a moment before turning away, ignoring the swirl of misty rain that began anew. "Find me when you're ready," she said over her shoulder. And with that, she vanished into the labyrinth of the streets, leaving Caldwell alone under the sputtering glow of the streetlight. Behind them, the precinct's windows flickered, revealing silhouettes of officers moving about, unaware that the city's underworld was about to be rocked by forces they barely comprehended. Hours before dawn, Lionel Greer stood behind the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, high above East Fall's skyline. The rain hadn't stopped, and rivulets of water streamed down the glass, distorting the view of the sprawling harbor in the distance. Greer was a tall man with impeccably styled salt and pepper hair and the bearing of a seasoned magnate. He wore a tailored navy suit, and a single gold watch flashed on his wrist under the subdued lighting of his luxury suite. Anyone meeting him for the first time might mistake him for a legitimate businessman, perhaps a philanthropist. Only a closer look at his hawkish eyes revealed the ruthlessness beneath. He dialed a number on his phone, eyes never leaving the endless city lights. On the other end of the line, a crisp female voice answered. "Mr. Greer," said the voice belonging to his personal assistant, Ava Riddell. "Your associates at the docks have concluded their nighttime shipments. No delays reported." Muddish Greer allowed a hint of satisfaction to twitch at the corners of his mouth. "Good. And the local authorities? Still on our payroll?" "Yes, sir. Commissioner Dale has assured us that any investigative eyes on the harbor will be limited. However, there was an odd incident tonight involving some police officers and a homeless woman. I checked the station logs after a tip from our contact. A few flags were raised regarding the Department of Defense stepping in." The mention of the Department of Defense made Greer's lips press into a thin line. His mind immediately went to old rumors, black ops, sealed records, and specialized agents who roamed off the grid. He'd spent years crafting an impenetrable network of corrupt officials, gang enforcers, and even high-level legal experts who laundered money for his operations. But what if some unpredictable ghost slipped through? He'd faced that possibility in the past. A mission in a foreign country that cost him a small fortune and half of his best men, all undone by a single specter of a soldier, rumored to be unstoppable. "Any identification on this woman?" he asked, forcing an even tone. He didn't want to betray the unease rattling inside him. If it was the same operative from years ago, he needed to act decisively. "Not official, but her name popped up in certain watch lists we maintain. She goes by Talia Moore, potentially ex-military. The details are murky, sealed behind clearance walls we can't breach," Ava reported. "She was released without charges after the Department of Defense intervened. That's never a good sign." Greer's grip tightened on the phone. He recalled rumors of an elite soldier rumored to have disrupted entire smuggling rings single-handedly. He had never confirmed it was Talia Moore by name, but a sense of recognition churned in his gut. "Keep me updated," he said curtly, "and arrange a meeting with Beck Montoya. I want him here tonight." Beck Montoya, an ex-Delta Force operative gone rogue, had been on Greer's payroll for a while. Montoya specialized in the kind of black market soldiering that cost a premium. He was as cunning as he was lethal, exactly the kind of person Greer relied on to eliminate threats that slipped through the usual cracks. Montoya was also rumored to have personal knowledge of certain ghosts from the specialized units he once served with. If Moore was the same phantom overshadowing Greer's nightmares, Montoya might be the only one capable of taking her out. After ending the call, Greer walked to a sleek bar in the corner of his penthouse. He poured himself a short glass of bourbon and sipped it slowly. The liquor burned his throat, but it steadied him, reminding him of the empire he'd built. The cargo ships at the harbor filled with illegal arms and human lives, the labyrinth of safe houses dotted across the city, and the politicians who owed him so many favors, they were effectively under his thumb. He had conquered every obstacle so far with a blend of strategic bribery, intimidation, and calculated violence. However, the mere possibility that Talia Moore was loose in Eastfall unsettled him in a way he detested. The recollection of a certain fiasco in South America years ago churned in his memory like a half-forgotten nightmare. He'd lost more men there than in any other operation, and if Moore had indeed survived, it meant his old ghosts were coming back to haunt him. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the polished floors of his penthouse with stark clarity. Greer made a silent vow. If Talia Moore had come to Eastfall, he would not underestimate her this time. The question remained, would even Beck Montoya's lethal skill set be enough to stop someone rumored to be unstoppable? Beck Montoya strode into Greer's penthouse later that night with the casual air of a man who'd seen far more lethal battlegrounds. He wore black tactical pants and a dark leather jacket, the faint smell of gun smoke clinging to him. A jagged scar on his right cheek hinted at past violence. Greer studied Montoya from across the marble floor, appreciating the controlled menace that radiated off him. Montoya was big but not bulky. Instead, he moved with a panther-like grace that always set others on edge. Ava guided Montoya to the private lounge area, where Greer waited with fresh drinks. Montoya declined the offered glass, his gaze scanning the opulent decor with mild disinterest. "You summoned me, Greer," he said, getting to the point. "I assume it's urgent since you had your assistant call at 3 in the morning?" Greer set his own drink down. "Talia Moore," he said simply. "I need to know if it's the same operative rumored to have demolished one of my biggest operations years ago. The details are fuzzy, but she's shown up on my radar again." Montoya's expression sharpened. "Moore? That name isn't common. If it's who I think it is, you've got a serious problem." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When we were in Delta, there were legends about her. Ghost warfare, infiltration, high-value target elimination. If she's here and has eyes on you, you're in more danger than you realize." Greer nodded, steepling his fingers. "That's precisely why I brought you in. I want you to find her, flush her out, and eliminate the threat. Money is no object, but keep it quiet, or we'll have bigger fish than the FBI breathing down our necks." Montoya's scar twitched with a subtle grimace. "Be careful what you wish for, Greer. Moore's not an amateur. She won't be easy to corner. If you want to beat her, you'd better let me handle it my way. No micromanagement, no interference." Greer inclined his head. "Understood. I'll funnel you whatever intel I have. But keep me posted on the major developments. The FBI is sniffing around, but they're so tangled in corruption and red tape, they can't make a move without telegraphing it. Moore isn't shackled by that." Montoya smirked. "I assume you have eyes on the harbor and certain shipments that are critical to your bottom line. She'll probably hit you where it hurts most." Greer didn't respond directly. They both knew the conversation was about more than just weapons or contraband. Rumor had it that Greer's real money came from trafficking human beings. Desperate men, women, and even children shipped into the country under false pretenses. The harbor was central to that trade, and Moore's sense of lethal moral justice would drive her straight to it if she discovered what was happening there. A cold tension filled the luxurious penthouse. Montoya rose, slipping a black baseball cap onto his head. "I'll begin at dawn. Keep your phone close." With that, he turned and strode out, never once glancing back at Greer. Greer let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Montoya was the best weapon in his arsenal, a living embodiment of the lethal training the U.S. military once provided. If anyone could stand toe-to-toe with Talia Moore, it was Beck Montoya. And yet, in the back of his mind, a flicker of doubt remained. He recalled the whispered legends of Moore's unstoppable ferocity. He couldn't afford to let that doubt paralyze him. One mistake, and the empire he had so meticulously built would go up in flames. As he walked to the window again, nursing a fresh pour of bourbon, Greer stared out at the city lights. In the far distance, he could see the red beacons marking the harbor's tallest cranes. If Moore was indeed a ghost from his past, he would either bury her in the depths of the ocean or watch his own kingdom burn around him. The choice, he feared, might not be his alone to make. In a deserted warehouse near the outskirts of Eastfall, Talia Moore set up a makeshift camp. She had quietly slipped into the building, which was half collapsed from years of disuse, with broken windows that allowed the wind to whistle through jagged panes of glass. Amidst the rubble, she found a secure corner blocked off by a tangle of rusted shelving units. It was perfect, out of sight from anyone who might wander in, but with enough vantage points to watch the entrance. She clicked on a small battery-powered lantern and spread out a stolen city map, marking locations rumored to be tied to Lionel Greer's operations. Over the past few days, Talia had tapped into old contacts. Some she owed favors, others who owed her. A pattern emerged. Everything circled back to Blackridge Harbor. Certain warehouses were rumored to be used for storing contraband, and cargo ships often arrived with poorly documented shipments. Greer allegedly made fortunes on the black market, but no one was sure exactly how wide his net was. As she pieced the puzzle together, Talia recalled fleeting intel from her Delta days. The name Greer had shown up in an operation planning file she glimpsed while working overseas, connected to arms deals that fueled local uprisings. That alone was enough to merit suspicion, but she'd learned in hushed tones of even darker dealings, trafficking in humans, turning desperate refugees into commodities. It was the kind of evil that made her blood boil. Years ago, her moral compass still pointed true, and she'd done everything she could to sabotage such operations. Now, out of uniform and official existence, she had only her well-honed skills to rely on. That was more than enough. In the corner of the warehouse, she kept a black duffel bag containing an array of weapons she'd acquired. Nothing too flashy, a compact handgun, a battered M4 carbine, and a few grenades she'd taken off unsuspecting gang members. She believed in traveling light and lethal. If she needed more specialized firepower, she could always scrounge or improvise. After all, a large part of her old training involved turning everyday objects into dangerous tools. Her mind wandered back to the policeman's baton smashing against her skull. She gingerly touched the bandage at her temple. The pain was a dull throb now, but it was a reminder of how quickly the facade of normalcy could evaporate. She also thought of Ethan Caldwell, the FBI agent who had approached her with an unexpected alliance. Was she wise to let a Fed into her orbit? She couldn't be sure of his integrity yet, but if he was investigating Greer, he might become an invaluable source of information. Another name surfaced in her mind, Beck Montoya. She'd heard rumors over the years about a skilled ex-Delta operator who'd gone private. Mercenaries from that lineage were often nightmares to face in the field. If Montoya was working for Greer, that meant Talia would likely encounter an adversary with training equal to her own. That possibility both alarmed and intrigued her. Delta Force operators were shaped by relentless discipline and a refusal to back down. If Montoya was just as unstoppable, their eventual clash could be deadly. The wind howled, rattling loose sheets of metal somewhere in the rafters, sounding eerily like distant gunfire. Talia checked her watch and decided to do one more sweep around the perimeter before trying to get any rest. She'd noticed a set of footprints by the warehouse's main door, perhaps another transient or a snooping local. She needed to ensure no one was watching her. Such vigilance was second nature by now, ingrained after so many missions where a single oversight meant certain death. Flicking off the lantern, she disappeared into the darkness, footsteps nearly silent as she made her rounds. 2 nights later, Talia decided to gather first-hand intel on the harbor. She arrived well after midnight, slipping past chain-link fences and avoiding the sporadic patrols by local thugs who seemed only half alert. The harbor stretched out before her like a steel forest, with towering cranes and rows of cargo containers stacked like giant bricks. The area was bathed in the harsh glow of floodlights and the tang of salt mixed with the metallic scent of shipping equipment. It was a place of perpetual motion, where trucks rumbled at odd hours and cargo ships groaned under the weight of their illicit payloads. Talia pressed herself against a shipping container, painted a dull blue, waiting patiently as a pair of armed guards wandered past. From her vantage, she counted at least 4 more roving patrols, each consisting of 2 to 3 men. They carried submachine guns, wore black hoodies or battered tactical gear, and lacked the disciplined formation of well-trained operatives. Likely they were lower-level enforcers under Greer's payroll. A stack of crates near the water's edge caught her eye. The crates bore a poorly covered insignia that read, "Medical Supplies," though she doubted any legitimate use. Talia crept forward, stepping silently through puddles. Once close enough, she noticed the crates were sealed with heavy locks. She had a set of lockpicks ready, but a closer guard patrol forced her to hide behind a forklift, heart pounding with a controlled rhythm. Patience was the name of the game. Overreact, and the entire harbor would go on lockdown. Eventually, the guards drifted elsewhere, and Talia slipped back into the shadows. She reached another area where a small cargo vessel was moored. Its deck lights illuminated a group of men hurriedly moving something. Large sealed barrels, if she wasn't mistaken. She snapped a quick photo on a phone she'd modified for anonymity, zooming in on the ship's name, Arcadia's Grace. She'd cross-referenced that with Caldwell's intel. The men hissed instructions in terse voices, occasionally glancing over their shoulders. They were jumpy, which meant something big was happening soon. Talia debated sabotaging the crates or planting a tracer, but without more intel, it might tip Greer off prematurely. Instead, she memorized every detail: the positioning of cameras mounted on poles, the route the guards took, the vantage points from the crane walkways that overlooked the docks. Her plan was forming in her mind: infiltration, sabotage, and extraction. She'd need a distraction large enough to sow confusion, giving her time to slip in, secure evidence, maybe even free any human cargo if it was on site, and vanish before the hired guns could corner her. Before she could gather more information, she detected the faint click of a weapon safety from behind. Spinning quickly, Talia spotted a solitary figure in a black jacket about 10 yards away. He raised a pistol, the muzzle barely catching the glint of the overhead lamp. She dove behind a stack of pallets, bullets splintering wood planks where her head had been. A short chase ensued, Talia weaving between containers and ducking under catwalks. The unknown assailant was skilled, not some random thug. She realized this was likely one of Montoya's men, maybe Montoya himself. She managed to lose him in the labyrinth of steel and concrete, eventually slipping through a small gate on the harbor's perimeter fence. Heart hammering, she sprinted into the adjacent industrial park. Only when she was sure she wasn't being followed did she pause to catch her breath. Her infiltration had yielded enough intel to form a plan, but it also confirmed what she suspected. Greer's crew was on high alert, and at least some of them were well trained. If she wanted to strike, she had to do so decisively and soon, before Greer battened down the hatches any further. Back in her warehouse hideout, Talia sifted through her mental notes. She'd been texting Caldwell, though rarely, using burner phones. He had forwarded partial schedules of Greer's shipments to her, gleaned from questionable sources in the Bureau. It seemed the next big delivery was imminent, possibly in less than a week. Talia guessed it might be a major arms consignment, or worse, a large group of trafficked individuals. Either way, it was the perfect time to strike. Caldwell arrived late one evening, stepping through a small opening in the rusted sheet metal wall. He carried 2 duffel bags, one filled with additional weapons and gear, the other with enough non-perishable food and water to last a few days. He set them down near Talia's makeshift table of crates. "I told you I'd come prepared," he said, a faint grin on his otherwise serious face. She appreciated the supplies. The constant cat-and-mouse routine left little time for normal errands. "What's the Bureau's latest on Greer's operation?" Caldwell folded his arms, casting a wary glance around the dim interior of the warehouse. "We have enough partial evidence to suspect that the next shipment includes at least a dozen trafficked people, possibly from overseas. Another smaller shipment might be weapons. Could be assault rifles, maybe heavier ordnance. But everything is hush-hush. Agents who dig too deep get reassigned or threatened. I'm working off-book with you for a reason. Talia paced around the table. She picked up a map with the harbor's layout, tapping a spot near the southwestern corner. This fence is old and partially hidden behind storage tanks. That's where I'll enter. I'll plant charges along key points to distract his security forces. Then I'll move to the central warehouses, where I believe they store the victims. If I can free them or at least cause enough chaos to shut down the operation, Greer will have to show himself. Ian and me? Caldwell asked, arching an eyebrow. I can't have you on the ground, Talia replied bluntly. She had no illusions about Caldwell's skill in a firefight against men like Montoya. But I need you for overwatch. If you can set up somewhere across the water, maybe a vacant building on the north side, you can monitor communications. You said you had a radio jammer? He nodded, rummaging through one of the duffel bags. He produced a compact device with a small antenna. This should disrupt their short-range frequencies, at least for a while, long enough for you to move in without them coordinating. After that, though, they might revert to simpler methods or switch channels we can't block. We'll have to be quick. Their eyes met in an unspoken accord. They both knew the plan was dangerous and that Talia would be severely outnumbered. One slip-up could mean capture or death. But Talia insisted on the direct assault, driven by a moral code that refused to let these traffickers exploit another soul. All right, Caldwell said, inhaling deeply. We do this soon. I'll let you know the moment I confirm the schedule of the ship's arrival. Once we strike, there's no backing down. Talia agreed, feeling the burn of resolve in her chest. She remembered the battered, defeated faces she glimpsed during missions gone by. People who had no idea who she was, but depended on her to bring them a chance at life. She intended to offer the same possibility to those trapped in Greer's lethal web. Unbeknownst to Talia, Beck Montoya's infiltration network had already flagged suspicious movements around the harbor. Montoya was no fool. He had systematically installed extra cameras near probable entry points, used motion sensors that fed back to a hidden laptop in his rented apartment overlooking the port, and placed watchers at vantage points beyond the standard security detail's skill level. While Talia planned her infiltration, Montoya meticulously prepared to counter any ghost tactics she might employ. One afternoon, Montoya sat in that rented apartment, staring at a bank of screens. His keen gaze flicked from one feed to another. Though the day was bright, he had thick curtains drawn, letting him see the monitors clearly. One screen showed Talia's earlier infiltration attempts, gleaned from a newly installed hidden camera that had caught only fleeting glimpses of her shape moving between containers. He noted her swift, silent approach, the methodical way she paused to observe guards. He sipped black coffee, letting the bitter taste remind him of old missions in deserts halfway around the world. If Talia Moore had indeed once been part of the same clandestine network he was, then Montoya understood precisely the level of skill he was dealing with. He found the challenge exhilarating. He'd grown bored of typical mercenary work, intimidating minor crooks or orchestrating a strong-arm tactic on untrained civilians. This was different. This was the chance to test himself against someone rumored to be unstoppable. He pulled up another screen, referencing a known black market dealer who specialized in advanced weaponry. Montoya had placed an urgent order for advanced sensor drones and high-capacity rifles. These measures might not fully neutralize Talia, but they'd even the odds. He also assigned specialized watchers, men with ex-military backgrounds, to the main thoroughfares leading in and out of the harbor. Montoya instructed them on how to set up booby traps, tripwires, and vantage points that Talia might not anticipate. Late in the evening, he spoke to Greer via a secure line. Your ghost is definitely poking around. I've got partial camera feeds confirming a single figure in the restricted areas. Likely more, though I haven't managed a clear ID shot. Greer's response crackled through, laced with tension. Then double the guard. We're moving a major shipment in 72 hours. If she's going to strike, it'll be then. Montoya smirked, though Greer couldn't see it. Relax, let her come. The harbor is my battleground, and I've prepared more surprises than she can handle. After hanging up, Montoya leaned back in his chair, flipping a knife idly between his fingers. In the quiet hum of the apartment, his thoughts raced back to those Delta Force days, the harsh training regimens, the high-stakes missions behind enemy lines. He remembered the hush that fell across briefing rooms whenever the name Talia Moore arose. If she was half the legend, he was about to face a formidable foe. The question wasn't just if he could kill her, it was if he could prove himself her better. His phone buzzed, alerting him to a text from one of his watchers. Spotted movement near Warehouse 12. Montoya's heartbeat quickened. It could be more or just a curious local, or maybe even a petty thief. Either way, he rose, grabbed his jacket, and prepared to head out. The final confrontation was drawing near. He intended to be the one writing the end of her story, no matter how unstoppable she thought she was. The city of Eastfall seemed to sense the tension brewing beneath its skyline. Overcast clouds drifted in, and the cold wind grew stronger, stirring trash in the gutters and rattling street signs. On the eve of the planned strike, Talia stood on the roof of a derelict building not far from the harbor. From here, she had a panoramic view of the water, the hulking cranes, and the countless metal containers stacked like tombstones. She took one final look at her phone, verifying the time Caldwell had given her. The target shipment would arrive at the far pier close to midnight. Her mind buzzed with the plan, each step mapped out with the same focus she once used in classified missions overseas. The infiltration route was set, the charges prepared, and her weapons checked and rechecked. She went over possible contingencies. If the alarm was raised too soon, she'd have to adapt. If Montoya had laid traps, she'd need to circumvent them quickly. Her old training reminded her, no plan survives first contact intact. Only fluid improvisation would keep her alive. She briefly imagined the look on Sergeant Ard's face if he ever discovered who she really was. The lethal expertise concealed beneath that tattered coat. A slight smirk played on her lips, but it faded as her gaze refocused on the harbor. Tonight wasn't about petty cops or bruised egos. It was about dismantling a monstrous trade and saving people from a fate worse than death. Meanwhile, in his penthouse, Lionel Greer paced back and forth, nerves on edge. The memory of Talia Moore haunted him like a recurring nightmare he couldn't shake. He'd seen body cam footage from some of his own men, quick glimpses of a figure darting in the dark, taking them out with chilling efficiency. Greer had spared no expense, ordering Montoya to fortify every corner. But a deep unease lingered. He poured yet another glass of bourbon, telling himself that this time, Montoya would succeed where others had failed. Or if Montoya failed, Greer had the resources to flee. He always had an escape route, right? Ethan Caldwell sat in an abandoned watchtower across the bay, hooking up the radio jammer to a portable power source. The vantage point allowed him to see the silhouettes of ships rolling in with the tide. He rubbed the bandage on his shoulder, a souvenir from a previous brush with corrupt elements in the Bureau. He could almost feel Talia out there, moving with the singular purpose of a guided missile. He only hoped their combined efforts would finally be enough to bring a predator like Greer to his knees. Beck Montoya loaded a fresh magazine into his custom rifle, double-checked the scope alignment, and glanced at the row of mercenaries standing by. The men were heavily armed, wearing mismatched gear but carrying high-grade weaponry. Montoya had drilled them over the past day, ensuring they would function as a coordinated unit rather than a ragtag gang. When she comes, we encircle and tighten the net. No one engages alone. That was Montoya's cardinal rule. Even the best soldier could be overwhelmed by numbers when the advantage was well orchestrated. Night descended with a hush that felt almost unnatural. Lights flickered across the harbor, forming a jagged skyline of steel and shadows. A storm front brewed on the horizon, lightning illuminating distant clouds. Both Talia and Montoya sensed it. The final calm before the storm, a brief respite before chaos erupted. Each believed themselves prepared. In a few hours, the smuggling racket that had stained Eastfall would find itself under siege. But as with all wars, the outcome was uncertain. Even a warrior with Talia's skill could be cornered, and even a cunning mercenary like Montoya could find his tactics turned against him. The stage was set, the pieces in place. All that remained was the opening shot. Midnight arrived at the harbor like a silent wraith, the moon partially veiled by thick, churning clouds. Talia Moore crouched behind a stack of rust-spotted cargo crates, listening intently for changes in the patrol's movement. She had penetrated the perimeter fence just as planned, But the tension in the air was far sharper than her previous recon nights.
Her world shattered in a place of supposed justice. Pregnant and fighting for her future, Isabella faced her husband's betrayal, the courtroom air thick with his lies. But the cruelest blow came from his mistress, Victoria, whose mocking laughter echoed as Isabella's strength gave out, and she collapsed. It seemed like the end. But in the hushed chaos that followed, the judge held a secret that would change everything. An envelope containing a truth so powerful it would wipe the smirk off the mistress's face forever and expose a lie bigger than anyone could have imagined. Isabella Hayes believed she had it all. From the outside, her life was a carefully curated masterpiece. She was married to Richard Hayes, a man whose ambition was as sharp as his tailored suits. His company, Hayes Development, was reshaping the city's skyline, one gleaming tower at a time. Their penthouse apartment, a glass box perched atop one of Richard's signature buildings, offered panoramic views of a world that seemed to lay at their feet. They were the golden couple, their photos gracing the society pages, their life a testament to modern success. This morning, like most mornings, began with the soft hum of the city waking below. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the minimalist living room. The scent of freshly brewed espresso filled the air, a ritual Isabella performed with meticulous care. She placed a steaming mug on the marble island next to Richard's plate of untouched toast. He was already on his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration, his thumb scrolling relentlessly. "Big day today?" she asked, her voice a gentle melody in the quiet space. She ran a hand over her burgeoning belly, a soft, protective gesture that had become second nature. At 7 months pregnant, she was a vessel of life, carrying their future, their son. Richard grunted in response, his eyes still glued to the screen. "Potentially. The Harrison deal is on a knife's edge. If we land it, we'll secure the waterfront project." "That's wonderful, darling," she said, though a familiar pang of disappointment pricked at her. She had hoped for a shared smile, a moment of connection before he was swallowed by his corporate world. She moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders and resting her cheek against his. "He's kicking," she whispered, trying to guide his hand to the spot. "He always gets excited when he hears your voice." Richard's hand remained firmly on his phone. "That's nice, Izzy," he said, his tone distracted. He finally looked up, his gaze distant. "I need to go. I have an early meeting with the architects." He drained his espresso in one gulp, pecked her on the cheek, and was gone. The scent of his expensive cologne lingered in the air, a ghost of his presence. Isabella sighed, a slow release of a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. This was their new normal. Richard, once so attentive and present, had become a man perpetually in motion, always chasing the next deal, the next victory. She told herself it was for them, for their growing family. His ambition was what had drawn her to him in the first place. He was a force of nature, and she had been happy to be swept up in his storm. She had met Richard at a charity gala 5 years ago. She was a budding art curator, passionate and full of dreams. He was the charismatic entrepreneur who had charmed her with his grand visions and unwavering confidence. He had pursued her with a single-minded determination that had been both flattering and overwhelming. He had promised her the world, and in many ways he had delivered. He had funded her own art gallery, Gallery Isabella, a chic space in the heart of the arts district. He had given her a life of luxury she could only have dreamed of. But lately, the gold of her gilded cage had started to feel cold and heavy. Her days were a blur of prenatal yoga classes, meetings with gallery staff, and lunches with friends who envied her life. They saw the designer clothes, the lavish vacations, the perfect husband. They didn't see the long, lonely evenings when Richard worked late, or the way his phone seemed permanently attached to his hand, a barrier between them. They didn't hear the silence that stretched between them in the vast, empty spaces of their home. Later that day, Isabella was at her gallery, overseeing the installation of a new exhibition. She loved this space. It was the one part of her life that felt entirely her own. Here, she wasn't just Richard Hayes's wife. She was Isabella, a woman with a keen eye for talent and a passion for art. Her assistant, a young, eager woman named Chloe, approached her with a tablet. "The final proofs for the catalog are ready for your approval, Isabella." Isabella smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Chloe. You've done a wonderful job." As she reviewed the proofs, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Richard. "Meeting ran late. Don't wait up for me, R." The familiar pang of disappointment returned, sharper this time. He had promised to take her to dinner tonight, to celebrate the gallery's anniversary. She typed back, "Everything okay? Don't forget our dinner plans." Minutes turned into an hour, and there was no reply. She called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried to dismiss the unease coiling in her gut. He was busy. The Harrison deal was important. She was being needy, emotional. It was the pregnancy hormones, she told herself. But as she drove home through the glittering city, a sense of foreboding settled over her. The city lights, usually a source of comfort and wonder, seemed to mock her, reflecting the emptiness of her own life. Back in the penthouse, the silence was deafening. She ate a solitary dinner at the Marble Island, the city lights her only companion. Later, as she prepared for bed, she noticed Richard's gym bag lying by the closet. He had said he was going straight to the office from an early morning workout. She unzipped it, intending to put his things in the laundry. Inside, nestled amongst his workout clothes, was a small velvet box. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it a gift? An anniversary surprise? Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside lay a delicate diamond necklace, exquisitely crafted and undeniably expensive. It was beautiful, but it wasn't her style. It was too flashy, too ostentatious. It was the kind of jewelry she'd seen on the wives of Richard's business associates, women who dripped with diamonds and desperation. Then she saw the inscription on the back of the pendant. A single initial. V. Isabella's blood ran cold. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. V for victory? For the waterfront project? It was a stretch. A desperate attempt to rationalize what her gut was screaming at her. This wasn't for her. This was for someone else. The gilded cage she had so carefully constructed around herself suddenly felt like a prison. The panoramic views from her penthouse window no longer looked like a world at her feet, but a world from which she was completely detached. And for the first time in a long time, Isabella Hayes felt a terrifying, gut-wrenching fear. Her perfect life, she realized, was a perfect lie. And she was standing right in the middle of it. The discovery of the necklace marked a shift in Isabella's world. The subtle cracks she had been papering over in her marriage now gaped open, revealing a chasm of doubt and suspicion. The initial shock gave way to a cold, methodical resolve. She placed the velvet box back in the gym bag, her movements precise and deliberate, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within her. She would not confront Richard. Not yet. An accusation without proof was just hysteria, and she knew he would twist her words, use her pregnancy-induced emotions against her. She needed more than a single, damning initial. The following days were a masterclass in deception. Isabella played the part of the devoted, doting wife, a role she had unknowingly been rehearsing for years. She greeted Richard with a smile, asked about his day, and feigned interest in his business dealings. But behind the placid facade, her mind was whirring, every sense on high alert. She became a detective in her own home, searching for clues in the mundane details of their shared life. The whispers started with his phone. Once casually left on the kitchen counter, it was now his constant companion, always in his pocket or placed face down on his desk. When it buzzed, he would glance at it quickly, his expression unreadable, before silencing it. The password, once their anniversary, had been changed. When she casually asked him for it, feigning a need to look up a recipe, he had hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "It's the new security protocol from the office, Izzy. Too complex to remember. Just use your own phone." The excuse was plausible, yet it felt like a door slamming shut in her face. Then came the receipts. Richard had always been meticulous with his finances, a trait that had once reassured her. Now his precision seemed suspicious. She started going through his credit card statements online, a violation of privacy she never thought she'd be capable of. She found a series of charges that didn't add up. A dinner for two at Le Ciel, one of the city's most romantic restaurants, on a night he claimed to be working late with his team. A charge from a high-end lingerie boutique, Fleur du Mal, a place she had never shopped at. And then, the most jarring discovery, a recurring monthly payment to a luxury apartment complex in a trendy, upscale neighborhood she rarely visited. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the screen. The amount was substantial, enough to rent a very comfortable apartment. Was this where he went on those late nights? Was this V's home? The thought was a physical blow, winding her, leaving her breathless. Isabella knew she had to see it for herself. One afternoon, under the pretext of visiting a new artist's studio, she drove to the address on the statement. The building was sleek and modern, its glass facade reflecting the clear blue sky. It was the kind of place for the young, successful, and unattached. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel as she parked across the street, her car a pathetic hiding place. She sat there for hours, a silent sentinel, watching the anonymous faces of residents come and go. Just as she was about to give up, her hope and dread warring within her, she saw him. Richard's gleaming black car pulled into the underground garage. He emerged a few minutes later, not in his usual sharp suit, but in casual, relaxed clothing. He looked younger, freer, a version of himself she hadn't seen in years. And he wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him, her hand tucked possessively in the crook of his arm. She was tall and stunningly beautiful, with long, dark hair that cascaded down her back. She was laughing, her head thrown back in a gesture of pure, unadulterated joy. And as they drew closer to the building's entrance, Isabella saw it. Glistening against the woman's collarbone was the diamond necklace. The necklace with the V pendant. Isabella felt the air leave her lungs. The world tilted on its axis, the scene before her blurring at the edges. So this was V, Victoria. The name came to her in a flash of intuition, a gut feeling so strong it was almost a certainty. The woman was the embodiment of everything Isabella was not. She was carefree, confident, and utterly captivating. Isabella shrank down in her seat, a wave of nausea washing over her. She watched as Richard leaned in and kissed Victoria, a passionate, lingering kiss that spoke of intimacy and familiarity. It was a kiss he hadn't given Isabella in months, maybe years. They disappeared into the building, leaving Isabella alone in her car, the silence a deafening roar in her ears. The drive home was a blur of tears and numb disbelief. The gilded cage had shattered, its golden bars now sharp, cruel shards. The life she had believed in, the man she had loved, the future she had been carrying. It was all a lie. A meticulously crafted, beautifully decorated lie. That evening, Richard came home late, as usual. He found her in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, her hands wrapped around her belly. The room was filled with soft toys, tiny clothes, and the scent of baby powder. It was a room filled with promises, promises that now felt hollow. "Izzy, what are you doing in the dark?" he asked, his voice laced with a weary sort of affection. She didn't turn to look at him. She couldn't. "Just thinking," she said, her voice a ghost of its usual self. He came to her, kneeling before her, and placed a hand on her belly. "He's going to have your eyes," he said softly. The hypocrisy of his words, of this tender gesture, was a fresh wave of pain. She looked at him then, her eyes searching his for a flicker of remorse, a hint of the truth. But all she saw was the same handsome, confident man she had married. The man who could build empires and break hearts with the same effortless charm. "I saw you today, Richard," she said, her voice trembling but steady. With her, the change in him was instantaneous. The tenderness vanished, replaced by a cold, hard mask. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," she whispered, the words tearing at her throat. "I saw the necklace, I saw the apartment, I saw everything." He stood up, towering over her, his shadow swallowing her in the dim light. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths and years of deception. The whispers had become a roar, and the shadows had finally taken form. The battle for her future, for her child's future, had just begun. The air in the nursery, once a sanctuary of hopeful dreams, was now thick with the poison of betrayal. Isabella remained in the rocking chair, her hands protectively cradling her belly, a silent anchor in the storm that was about to break. Richard stood before her, his posture rigid, his face a carefully constructed mask of innocence. But his eyes, those windows to the soul she once thought she knew so well, betrayed a flicker of panic. "You're being ridiculous, Isabella," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You're pregnant, emotional. You're not thinking clearly." It was his classic defense, the one he used whenever she dared to question him, to challenge his authority. He was painting her as the hysterical wife, a narrative he had been subtly crafting for years. But this time, Isabella would not be silenced. The sight of him with Victoria, the casual intimacy of their kiss, had burned away the last vestiges of her self-doubt. She rose from the chair, her movements slow and deliberate, and faced him, her eyes blazing with a newfound fire. "Don't you dare use our child as an excuse for your lies," she said, her voice shaking with a potent mix of anger and grief. "I saw you, Richard. I saw you kiss her. I saw the necklace you bought her, the one you hid in your gym bag, the one with the initial V on it. Is her name Victoria?" The mention of the name, the specificity of her knowledge, seemed to land a physical blow. Richard flinched, a barely perceptible movement, but Isabella saw it. It was the first crack in his armor. "You've been following me?" he demanded, shifting his strategy from dismissal to outrage. "You've been spying on me, after everything I've given you? This gallery, this apartment, this life. You have no right to question me." "I have every right," she countered, her voice rising. "I am your wife, the mother of your child. I have the right to know who you are sharing our life with, our money with, our future with." "She's nobody," he spat, the words laced with contempt. "She's a distraction, a bit of fun. It means nothing." "Nothing?" Isabella's laugh was a bitter, broken sound. "You pay for her apartment, you buy her diamond necklaces, you spend the nights you're supposed to be with your family, with her. That doesn't sound like nothing to me, Richard. That sounds like a second life." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture of frustration and impatience. You wouldn't understand. The pressure I'm under, the stress of the business. Sometimes a man needs an escape. An escape? She repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. And what about me? What's my escape, Richard? When I'm up all night, worried about you, about the baby, where do I get to go? Who do I get to turn to? The raw vulnerability in her voice seemed to momentarily break through his defenses. He took a step towards her, his expression softening. Izzy, come on. It's not like that. I love you. You and the baby. You're my world. His words, once a source of comfort and security, now felt like a manipulative ploy. She backed away from him, her hand held up as if to ward off his lies. No, don't touch me. Don't you dare say you love me. Not after this. His face hardened again, his brief moment of contrition evaporating. Fine. You want to be this way? You want to throw away everything we have because of a stupid, meaningless fling? Then so be it. He turned to leave, dismissing her, dismissing their entire life together with a casual shrug. It's not meaningless to me, she cried, her voice cracking. And it's not meaningless to our son. What am I supposed to tell him? That his father was too busy building his empire and sleeping with other women to be there for him? He whirled around, his eyes blazing with a cold fury she had never seen before. You will not use my son against me. He's my son too, she shot back, her maternal instincts kicking in, a fierce protective wave. And I will not have him raised in a house built on lies and deceit. I want you to leave, Richard. I want you out of this house. Tonight. A humorless, mocking smile twisted his lips. You want me to leave? My house? The one I paid for? The one you so happily decorated with my money? You're delusional, Isabella. I don't care about the money, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I care about honesty. I care about respect. And you have shown me none. You're making a huge mistake, he said, his voice low and threatening. You have no idea who you're dealing with. You think you can fight me? I will ruin you. I will take everything from you. You'll be left with nothing. I already have nothing, she replied, her gaze unwavering. Because I have nothing real. This life, this marriage, it's all a sham, and I'm done playing my part. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. He saw a woman he no longer recognized. The timid, accommodating wife had been replaced by a woman of steel, a woman who had found her strength in the ashes of her broken heart. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the nursery, the slam of the front door echoing through the vast, empty penthouse. The sound was final, a punctuation mark at the end of a chapter of her life. Isabella sank back into the rocking chair, the adrenaline that had fueled her confrontation draining away, leaving her weak and trembling. She wrapped her arms around her belly, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. She had stood up to him. She had chosen herself, her son, over the gilded cage. The path ahead was terrifying and uncertain. She knew Richard's threat was not an idle one. He would come after her with everything he had. But as she sat there in the quiet darkness of the nursery, a strange sense of peace settled over her. For the first time in a long time, she was free. The confrontation was over, but the war had just begun. The transition from the sterile silence of her penthouse to the charged atmosphere of the courtroom was a jarring one. The family court building was a stoic, imposing structure of granite and glass, a place where lives were dissected and futures decided under the cold, impartial gaze of the law. For Isabella, it felt less like a hall of justice and more like a modern-day Colosseum, and she was the gladiator being led into the arena. Her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Jenkins, had warned her it would be difficult. Richard has hired the best, she had said, her tone grim. Landon Michaels is known for his scorched earth tactics. He will try to paint you as an unstable, gold-digging opportunist. You need to be prepared for that. Isabella had steeled herself for the fight, but the reality of it was more brutal than she could have imagined. The preliminary hearings had been a relentless assault on her character. Richard's legal team had twisted her every action, her every word, into something sinister. Her passion for her art gallery was portrayed as frivolous spending. Her prenatal anxiety was presented as evidence of emotional instability. They were trying to build a case that she was an unfit mother, a desperate attempt to gain leverage in the divorce settlement. Today was the first day of the official proceedings, the day they would discuss the division of assets and, most importantly, the terms of custody for their unborn child. The courtroom was a grand, wood-paneled room, the air thick with the scent of old paper and quiet desperation. Isabella sat at the plaintiff's table, her back ramrod straight, her hands resting on her swollen belly as if to shield her son from the toxicity of the room. Sarah sat beside her, a reassuringly solid presence. Richard was already at the defendant's table, looking every bit the powerful, wronged husband. He was impeccably dressed in a dark, custom-tailored suit, his expression a carefully calibrated mix of sorrow and resolve. His lawyer, Landon Michaels, was a slick, silver-haired man with a shark-like smile. But it wasn't Richard or his lawyer that made Isabella's breath catch in her throat. It was the woman sitting in the front row of the gallery, directly behind Richard. Victoria. She was even more beautiful up close. Dressed in a form-fitting crimson dress that screamed confidence and defiance, she looked as if she had just stepped off a fashion runway. Her dark hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless. She met Isabella's gaze across the room, and a slow, triumphant smirk spread across her face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated victory, a silent declaration that she had won. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest. The audacity of the woman to show up here, to flaunt her victory in Isabella's face, was staggering. She was a living, breathing testament to Richard's betrayal, and her presence in this courtroom was a calculated act of cruelty. The proceedings began, and the room was filled with the monotonous drone of legal jargon. Landon Michaels was the first to speak, his voice smooth and persuasive, as he painted a picture of Richard as a hard-working, generous man who had been blindsided by his wife's sudden and irrational behavior. "Mr. Hayes has provided his wife with a life of unparalleled luxury," he said, his voice resonating through the courtroom. "He has supported her hobbies, funded her business ventures, and given her everything a woman could possibly want. And how does she repay him? With unfounded accusations, emotional outbursts, and a desperate attempt to seize the assets he has worked his entire life to build." Sarah countered with a calm, measured defense, presenting evidence of Richard's infidelity, including the apartment lease and credit card statements. But Michaels was a master of deflection, twisting each piece of evidence, framing it as a misunderstanding, a business expense, a gesture of friendship. "My client is a generous man," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "He helps many people. Is it now a crime to be kind?" Isabella felt a rising tide of frustration and helplessness. They were making her feel like the villain in her own story. She watched as Richard sat there, nodding in agreement with his lawyer's outrageous claims, his face a mask of solemn sincerity. He wouldn't even look at her. The judge, a stern, gray-haired woman named Judge Eleanor Vance, listened patiently, her expression unreadable. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, a woman who could see through the theatrics and get to the heart of the matter. Isabella clung to that reputation like a lifeline. As the morning wore on, the focus shifted to the baby. Michaels argued that given Isabella's fragile emotional state, it was in the child's best interest for Richard to have primary custody. "Mr. Hayes can provide the child with a stable, secure home, with the financial resources to ensure his every need is met," Michaels argued. "Ms. Hayes, on the other hand, is unpredictable." The word hung in the air, a deliberate, poisoned dart. Isabella felt a surge of rage so intense it made her dizzy. Unpredictable? Unstable? She had been a rock, a constant in Richard's whirlwind life. She had built a home, a life, a future for them. And now they were trying to take her son away from her. She looked over at Victoria again. The smirk was still there, wider this time, more confident. She caught Richard's eye and gave him a subtle, encouraging nod. They were a team, a united front against her. The mistress and the husband, sitting in a court of law, trying to strip the wife and mother of everything she held dear. The courtroom felt like it was closing in on her, the walls seeming to shrink, the air growing thin. The weight of the betrayal, the stress of the legal battle, the fierce, protective love for her unborn child. It was all becoming too much to bear. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and the edges of her vision began to blur. The judge's voice, the lawyer's arguments, the smug look on Victoria's face, it all started to fade into a muffled, distant hum. The gilded cage had been replaced by a courtroom, but the feeling of being trapped, of being suffocated, was the same. The pressure in the courtroom was suffocating, a physical weight pressing down on Isabella's chest. Landon Michael's words echoed in her ears, each one a carefully aimed blow designed to dismantle her credibility, her character, her very identity as a mother. Fragile emotional state, unpredictable. The clinical dismissive terms were a cruel distortion of the pain and betrayal she had endured. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, trying to anchor herself in the swirling chaos of her thoughts. She had to be strong. For her son. She focused on the steady, rhythmic beat of her own heart, a counterpoint to the frantic pounding in her head. Furthermore, Michaels continued, his voice dripping with false concern, we believe that Ms. Hayes's erratic behavior poses a potential risk to the child. A newborn requires a calm, stable environment, something we fear Ms. Hayes is currently incapable of providing. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. It was a low blow, a vicious, calculated strike at her deepest vulnerability. To suggest she could be a danger to her own child was a cruelty beyond measure. Isabella's eyes flew to Richard's. She searched his face for a flicker of protest, a sign that this had gone too far, that even he had a line that wouldn't be crossed. But his expression was unyielding, his gaze fixed on his lawyer, his jaw set in a hard, determined line. He was complicit in this. He was allowing this to happen. Her gaze then shifted to the source of so much of her pain, to Victoria. The woman was not even trying to hide her glee. Her lips were curled into a triumphant, mocking smile, her eyes sparkling with malicious delight. As Isabella watched, Victoria leaned over and whispered something in the ear of the woman sitting next to her. They both looked at Isabella, and then erupted in a soft but distinctly audible laugh. It was a sound of pure contempt, a sound that cut through the legal jargon and the courtroom decorum, a sound that sliced through Isabella's carefully constructed composure. It was the sound of a woman who had taken everything from her, her husband, her home, her sense of security, and was now reveling in her destruction. That laugh was the final straw. The room began to spin, the faces of the judge, the lawyers, the spectators, blurring into a grotesque, distorted mural. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead, and her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. The baby, as if sensing her distress, gave a sudden, sharp kick, a jolt of life in the midst of her spiraling despair. She tried to speak, to tell Sarah that she wasn't feeling well, that she needed a moment. But the words wouldn't come. A black, shadowy veil descended over her vision, and the muffled sounds of the courtroom faded into an echoing silence. Her hand, which had been clutching her belly, slipped away. She slumped forward, her body suddenly weightless, her consciousness receding like a tide going out to sea. The last thing she heard was Sarah's cry of alarm, a sharp, panicked, "Isabella!" And then nothing. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Sarah leaped to her feet, shouting for a medic. The bailiffs rushed forward. Even Judge Vance, for a moment, lost her judicial composure, her eyes wide with shock and concern. Richard, for his part, seemed frozen in his chair, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. The carefully orchestrated legal drama had suddenly become terrifyingly real. But Victoria's reaction was the most telling. As the room buzzed with frantic energy, as Isabella lay unconscious on the floor, Victoria's mocking smile faltered for only a second, replaced by a flicker of annoyance, as if this was an inconvenient interruption to her entertainment. The laughter had stopped, but the cold, callous amusement in her eyes remained. Paramedics arrived, their movements swift and professional. They surrounded Isabella, checking her vitals, speaking in low, urgent tones. Sarah hovered over them, her face pale with worry. "It's the stress," she murmured to one of the paramedics. "She's 7 months pregnant. This whole ordeal—" The lead paramedic nodded grimly. "Her blood pressure is dangerously low. We need to get her to the hospital, now." As they carefully lifted Isabella onto a stretcher, a tense, unnatural silence fell over the courtroom. All eyes were on the dramatic, unexpected turn of events. All eyes, that is, except for Judge Vance's. Her gaze was fixed on Richard, and then on Victoria. She had seen the smirk. She had heard the whispered laugh. She had watched the entire cruel performance play out. And her expression, once unreadable, was now one of cold, undisguised fury. "This hearing is adjourned," she announced, her voice ringing with an authority that cut through the lingering chaos. "We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. She paused, her eyes narrowing as she looked directly at Landon Michaels. "And Mr. Michaels," she said, her tone icy, "I suggest you and your client have a serious discussion about courtroom decorum. This is a court of law, not a theater for personal vendettas. Any further displays of disrespect will be met with the harshest possible sanctions." Her words were a clear, unequivocal warning. The game had changed. The collapse had been a moment of weakness for Isabella, but it had also been a moment of revelation for the judge. The mask of the wronged husband and the supportive friend had slipped, revealing the ugly, cruel faces beneath. And Judge Vance was not a woman who suffered fools or bullies gladly. Isabella awoke to the steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the sterile, antiseptic smell of a hospital room. For a moment, she was disoriented, the stark white walls a jarring contrast to the dark wood of the courtroom she last remembered. Then, the events of the previous day came rushing back in a tidal wave of anxiety and fear. The collapse, the mocking laughter, the threat of losing her son. Sarah was sitting in a chair by her bedside, her face etched with concern. "Hey," she said softly, her voice a comforting balm. "Welcome back. You gave us all quite a scare." "The baby?" Isabella whispered, her hand instinctively flying to her belly. "The baby is fine," Sarah reassured her. "Strong heartbeat. The doctor said you collapsed from stress-induced hypotension. You just need to rest." Rest. The concept seemed like a foreign luxury. How could she rest when her entire future was hanging in the balance? "The hearing," she began. "It's been reconvened for this morning," Sarah said, her expression hardening. "But don't worry. I've already filed a motion for a continuance. You're in no condition to—" "No," Isabella interrupted, her voice surprisingly firm. She pushed herself up, wincing at the pull of the IV in her arm. "I have to be there." "Isabella, that's not a good idea," Sarah protested. "They think I'm weak, Sarah," she said, her eyes flashing with a renewed determination. "They think I'm unstable. If I don't show up today, it will just prove their point. I'm not going to let them win. Not like this." And so, against her lawyer's and her doctor's advice, Isabella returned to the courtroom. She was paler, more fragile-looking than the day before, but there was a new steel in her spine. The events of the previous day had not broken her. They had forged her. The atmosphere in the courtroom was palpably different. The air was thick with a tense, expectant silence. Richard and his legal team looked subdued, chastened by the judge's warning. Even Victoria, seated once again in the gallery, had replaced her smirk with a more demure, contemplative expression, though her eyes still held a glint of defiance. Judge Vance entered, her face as stern and unreadable as ever. "Before we proceed," she began, her voice cutting through the silence, "I want to address the events of yesterday. This court is deeply concerned by the tactics being employed in this case, and the undue emotional distress being placed upon a pregnant woman. Let me be clear, this will not be tolerated." She then turned her attention to a file on her desk, a file that hadn't been there the day before. In light of the intensity of these proceedings and the serious nature of the custody dispute, I took the liberty of expediting a certain piece of evidence that was submitted by the plaintiff's counsel last week. She picked up a sealed manila envelope. The room held its collective breath. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Vance said, her eyes locking onto Richard's, "you have repeatedly stated that your primary concern is the welfare of your unborn child, a child you claim to be yours." "Of course, Your Honor," Richard said, his voice smooth and confident. "He is my son, my heir." "And you, Mr. Michaels, have built your entire case for custody around this paternal claim and the supposed instability of the mother," the judge continued, her gaze shifting to the lawyer. "That is correct, Your Honor," Michaels affirmed, though a flicker of unease was now visible in his eyes. "I see," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. She ripped open the envelope with a sharp, decisive tear that echoed through the silent courtroom. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and studied it for a long, dramatic moment. Then she looked up, her gaze sweeping over Richard, then Victoria, before finally settling on Isabella, a flicker of something that looked almost like compassion in her eyes. "Well, this certainly clarifies things," she said. She leaned forward, placing the paper flat on her desk and turning it to face the courtroom. With a resounding thud that made everyone jump, she slammed her hand down on the table next to it. "The results of the prenatal paternity test," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "According to this legally binding document, the probability of Richard Hayes being the biological father of Isabella Hayes' child is 0%. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, a perfect, stunned vacuum. Then, a collective, audible gasp. Isabella stared, her mind struggling to process the words. 0%. It was impossible. She had never been with anyone else. Richard was the only man she had ever loved, the only man she had ever been with. This had to be a mistake. Richard's face had gone completely white, the color draining from it, as if he had seen a ghost. He stared at the paper, then at Isabella, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, no sound coming out. Landon Michaels looked as if he had been poleaxed, his slick, confident demeanor shattering into a million pieces. His entire case, his entire strategy, had been obliterated in a single, devastating moment. But the most dramatic reaction came from Victoria. Her carefully constructed mask of demure innocence crumbled, revealing the raw, ugly shock beneath. She shot to her feet, her eyes wide with disbelief, her finger pointing accusingly at Isabella. "She's lying. She cheated. That baby isn't his." "Sit down, madam," Judge Vance thundered, her voice a whip crack that silenced Victoria instantly. "There will be order in this court." The judge's gaze returned to Richard, her eyes filled with a cold, righteous fury. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "it seems you have been lying to this court, lying to your wife, lying to everyone. The question is, why?" The verdict was in. But it wasn't the verdict anyone had been expecting. The DNA results had not just settled the question of paternity. They had exposed a web of deceit so deep, so twisted, that no one in that courtroom could have possibly imagined it. The real trial, the trial of Richard Hayes's character, was just beginning. The courtroom was in an uproar. The judge's gavel banged repeatedly, a desperate attempt to restore order in the wake of the bombshell she had just dropped. But the shockwave of the DNA results was too powerful, a seismic event that had irrevocably altered the landscape of all their lives. Isabella felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. 0%. The words echoed in her mind, a nonsensical, impossible refrain. She looked at Richard, who was now ashen-faced and trembling, and a new, more terrifying question began to form in her mind. If he wasn't the father, then who was? And why had he let her believe he was? Sarah, ever the quick-thinking lawyer, saw the opportunity the judge had created. She rose to her feet. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady amidst the chaos. "In light of this shocking revelation, we demand a full and immediate disclosure of Mr. Hayes's medical records, specifically any records pertaining to his fertility." Landon Michaels, still reeling from the complete implosion of his case, could only stammer a weak objection, but Judge Vance silenced him with a single withering glare. "Motion granted," she declared. "Mr. Hayes, you will comply immediately. This court suspects you have been perpetrating a fraud not only upon your wife but upon this court as well, and I can assure you we do not take kindly to that." The truth, when it finally emerged, was more devastating and pathetic than Isabella could have imagined. Richard Hayes, the titan of industry, the man who projected an image of virility and power, was sterile. A bout of mumps in his late teens had left him unable to father children, a secret he had guarded with a fierce, desperate shame his entire adult life. He had known from the moment Isabella told him she was pregnant that the child could not be his. But his ego, his pathological need to control the narrative of his perfect life, had been stronger than his sense of decency. He had seen her pregnancy not as a betrayal, but as an opportunity. An heir had been delivered to him, a son to carry on the Hayes name, and he had simply claimed it as his own, never once questioning its origins, because to do so would have meant revealing his own humiliating secret. The affair with Victoria was his way of compensating, a desperate attempt to prove his manhood to himself. He had lavished her with gifts, with a lifestyle, all to prop up his fragile, shattered ego. The aftermath of the revelation was swift and brutal. Richard's carefully constructed world came crashing down around him. The court case, which he had initiated to punish and control Isabella, had backfired spectacularly. He was exposed as a liar and a fraud. The judge, incensed by his deception, awarded Isabella a divorce settlement that was far more generous than she had ever asked for. She was given the penthouse, the gallery, and a substantial portion of his assets. He was stripped of any and all parental rights to the child he had so arrogantly claimed as his own. His professional life suffered as well. The scandal was front-page news, the story of the sterile tycoon who tried to claim another man's child too juicy for the tabloids to resist. His reputation was ruined, his business partners deserted him, and the empire he had built on a foundation of lies began to crumble. Victoria, for her part, disappeared from the scene as quickly as she had appeared. With Richard's fortune dwindling and his reputation in tatters, she had no more use for him. She was a parasite who had been drawn to the glow of his success, and now that the light had been extinguished, she moved on in search of a new host. For Isabella, the aftermath was a strange mix of turmoil and liberation. The question of the baby's paternity still loomed large, a mystery she now had to solve. She thought back to the months before she had conceived, a time when her marriage to Richard was already strained, when she had felt lonely and isolated. There had been a charity trip to build houses in a developing country, a trip Richard had encouraged her to take, probably to get her out of the way so he could spend more time with Victoria. On that trip, she had met a doctor, a kind, compassionate man named Ben Carter, who ran the local clinic. They had bonded over their shared passion for helping others, their conversations lasting late into the night. There had been one night, a night of emotional vulnerability and a little too much wine. A night she had pushed to the back of her mind, chalking it up to a momentary lapse in judgment. A mistake she had immediately regretted. With trembling hands, she found his contact information online and sent him an email, the words a jumble of hope and fear. The days that followed were a torment of waiting. She was free from Richard, but she was adrift in a sea of uncertainty. She had her son, this miracle child growing inside her, but she didn't know his story, his heritage. Then, one afternoon, as she was sitting in the nursery, the room that had been the scene of so much pain and now held the promise of a new beginning, her phone rang. It was an international number. "Isabella?" a warm, familiar voice said. "It's Ben Carter. I got your email." And in that moment, as she listened to the kind, gentle voice of the man who was, she now knew, the father of her child, Isabella felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. The storm was over. The lies had been washed away. And for the first time in a very long time, she could see the horizon. It was clear and bright, and it was hers and hers alone to navigate. A year later, the city skyline that Isabella looked out upon was the same, but her view of it had changed entirely. The glass walls of the penthouse no longer felt like a cage, but like a window to a world of infinite possibilities. The silence that had once haunted the vast, empty rooms was now filled with the happy gurgles and coos of her son, Leo. Leo was a beautiful, healthy baby, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that held a spark of gentle curiosity, eyes that were a mirror of his father's. He was the center of Isabella's universe, the sun around which her new life revolved. Her life was no longer defined by society pages and lavish parties, but by the simple, profound joys of motherhood. Her days were a happy chaos of feedings, diaper changes, and stroller walks through the park. She had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, a fierce, unconditional love that had healed the wounds of her past and given her a new sense of purpose. Gallery Isabella was thriving. Freed from the shadow of Richard's influence, she had transformed it into a space that truly reflected her own vision. She championed emerging, unconventional artists, and the gallery had gained a reputation for its bold, innovative exhibitions. It was a success that was entirely her own, built on her talent, her passion, and her hard work. Ben had flown in to meet his son, a week after Leo was born. The meeting had been tentative at first, a delicate dance of two strangers bound by a shared creation. But as he held his son in his arms for the first time, his eyes filled with a love so pure and overwhelming, any awkwardness between them had melted away. He was a good man, a kind and decent man, and he had embraced his role as a father with an open heart. He couldn't be there physically. His work at the clinic was too important to abandon, but he was a constant presence in their lives. They Skyped every day, Ben's smiling face a familiar and comforting sight on the laptop screen. He sang lullabies to Leo from thousands of miles away and told Isabella stories of his work, of the lives he was saving, the difference he was making. Their relationship was unconventional, a modern family forged in the crucible of unexpected circumstances. They were not in love in the traditional sense, but they shared a deep, abiding respect and affection for one another. They were partners in the truest sense of the word, united in their love for their son. Richard, she heard, had lost everything. His company had gone bankrupt, and he had been forced to sell off his assets to pay his debts. He had become a ghost in the city he once ruled, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Isabella felt no sense of triumph at his downfall, only a quiet, detached pity. He was a man who had been so consumed by his own image that he had lost sight of his own humanity. One sunny afternoon, as Isabella was sitting on a blanket in the park, watching Leo attempt to crawl, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ben. "Thinking of you and our boy. I was thinking, the clinic is hosting a fundraiser next month, a chance for our donors to see the work we're doing. I was wondering, would you and Leo consider coming?" Isabella smiled. A trip. A chance to show Leo where his father lived, the world he was a part of. It felt right. It felt like the next step in their journey. She looked at her son, his face alight with determination as he reached for a colorful toy just beyond his grasp. He was a perfect blend of both his parents, her resilience, Ben's quiet strength. He was a symbol of her new beginning, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful lives are the ones that are born from the ashes of our broken plans. She typed back her reply, her heart full of a quiet, joyful certainty. "We'd love to. We'll be there." As she sent the message, she looked up at the sky, a vast, endless expanse of blue. For so long, her world had been defined by gilded cages and courtroom battles. But now it was defined by this love, this freedom, this beautiful, messy, unpredictable, and wonderful new beginning. And it was more than she had ever dreamed of. It was real. Isabella's journey from a gilded cage to a life of authentic freedom is a powerful reminder that our greatest strength is often found in our most vulnerable moments. Her story proves that true wealth isn't measured in diamonds or penthouses, but in resilience, love, and the courage to fight for the truth. In the end, it wasn't just a courtroom verdict. It was the reclaiming of a life. If Isabella's story of strength and survival moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story of justice and empowerment.